Tech Interrupt. I am Misa Abbas from Cubix, and we are going to talk about blockchain and its security and privacy challenges. So, from the last decade, blockchain is not only disrupting banking and financial sectors, but also disrupting automated entertainment, financial services, food and beverages, insurance and oil and gas companies, pharmaceutical, retail, social media, technological sector. So blockchain is like into all of these sectors now. But blockchain is going to drive the next era of technology as a de facto standard of the trust to become the most widely adopted technology after the internet. Blockchain is still young and evolving. Past security threats in blockchain platforms raise serious security concerns on the adaptation of blockchain. These security threats are disturbing the adaptation of blockchain. So, despite a number of potential benefits, digital disruption poses many challenges related to information security and privacy. In this session, we are going to try to propose a security framework that integrates the blockchain technology with the smart devices in a number of industries to provide a smart and secure platform. So, for today's session, we have Jorge Sebastiao joining us. He is a seasoned CTO, CISO advisor, and international speaker with experience in blockchain, decentralized finance, or DeFi, asset tokenization, cybersecurity, AI, IoT, 5G, cloud computing, disaster recovery, big data, managed services. So he is also a professional advisor in on generating business value and enabling sustainability. He created the powerful framework A6 of security. Assess, apply, administer, awareness, and agility. George is a regular speaker at international conferences. He is also a author of book Law Face Cachée du Credit, the hidden face of something. And you can also follow him on a number of social media platforms. He is also on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, YouTube, and SlideShare with more than 500 million connections. He is also an AI and blockchain advisor to numerous global blockchain organizations and global associations. So, welcome, George. Thank you for giving us your time, and thank you for
Yes,
being
it's
here.
my pleasure. It's my pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much.
It's a great pleasure to be here. I thank very much hospitality of Cubix and Pakistan to be part of this session today. And of course, thank you for the nice and kind introduction. As you mentioned, is extremely correct that blockchain as a technology is a technology that is as evolutionary and as revolutionary as the internet was to us 30 years ago. Blockchain is about 11, 12 years old, so it's a fairly new technology. Although blockchain existed before that as a manual system, it has really existed only since 12 years. Now, during this 12 years, blockchain has gone through a series of generations or evolutions. You can say that Bitcoin, as one of the first blockchain, is primarily what we sometimes refer to as blockchain 1.0. But about 7 years ago, we introduced Ethereum, which is sometimes also referred to as blockchain 2.0, which introduced some extra capabilities into blockchain. These capabilities included, for example, smart contracts, which enable us to not just transfer trust and value, but also execute rules and conditions during this transfer of value. It is actually these same smart contracts that today enable us to do what we sometimes refer to as DeFi or distributed finance. Now, we will get to that in a little while since I have several projects in this area.
Yeah.
But
So,
yeah, go ahead, please.
yeah, I want to start from the first question.
Yes.
So, if you Okay.
Yeah, please go.
So, as you said, blockchain is an evolving technology. It's new to the industry. So, blockchain is still an expeditionally evolving technology which has potential to lead to a shift in thinking about digital transactions in multiple sectors, including Internet of Things, healthcare, energy, supply chain, manufacturing, cybersecurity, and principally financial services, as you said. Now, despite the huge opportunities blockchain offers, it suffers from the challenges and limitations such as scalability, security, privacy, and compliance, and also government issues that have not yet been thoroughly explored and addressed. What are the ways forward for these issues?
Okay. Your point is correct. Although blockchain as a technology was introduced as a technology of trust, as you know, we've been trying to do e-commerce on internet for the last 30 years, and we have achieved some level of e-commerce. That's why sites like, for example, Amazon and Alibaba have become extremely popular and extremely also valuable as organizations. However, we still have not addressed the issue of transfer of trust effectively because the initial protocols that were part of the internet were not designed for trust. Trust got built on top. So HTTPS, SSL, and all these protocols were designed to add extra layers of trust. The nice thing about blockchain as a technology, it was designed with trust in mind from the beginning. But not just trust in mind, it was trust in mind without a central authority. As you know, today, when we use HTTPS and we have a digital certificate, the digital certificates must be validated by a central authority. So in a blockchain environment, we no longer have this need for this central authority. So it's not just a technology of trust, it's also a technology of decentralization. That means two parties, without knowing each other and without any intermediaries or direct intermediaries, have the capability to transfer trust and value between each other. Now, what are some examples of this extreme? We have in Dubai, where one of the islands got purchased for about $8 million. And when we have also building in the UK, I mentioned, that got bought for 17 million pounds using Bitcoins as well. This would not have been possible a few years ago. However, your point is correct that although we have addressed some elements of trust and decentralization, there is still some issues associated with scalability and privacy. Let's start first with scalability. Blockchains like, for example, Bitcoin can only process about 7 transactions per second. Blockchains like Ethereum can process about 20 plus transactions per second. It's much faster, but still not fast enough. That's why these systems, when there's a high volume of transactions, there tends to be a clog up, a bit like a traffic jam. So on one side, it slows down the processing of these transactions, or they get not to be processed, or they take too long to process. Or sometimes, in the case of Ethereum, the transaction fees rise enormously. So that means for small transactions, the transaction fees become even larger. Now, this is on the scalability side. On the security side, obviously, most of the blockchains required a wallet where we typically store your private key. Now, these wallets are still implemented using traditional systems like iOS, OS X, Windows, and others. All these systems have vulnerabilities built into them, which means that if you're able to penetrate these systems, you may end up having access to these wallets. And by having access to the wallets and the private keys, then you can completely control the blockchain of that particular individual. So this many of the attacks have sometimes to do also with social engineering, given that still today the weakest point in cybersecurity primarily is the user. So we need to drive a much higher degree of awareness to actually reduce that. or that risk. The third point that you mentioned was the issue with privacy. Well, it depends. Although the data that is stored in the blockchain can actually be encrypted and properly secured, some blockchains are designed as a public ledger. Example, Bitcoin. So Bitcoin is actually what we call pseudo-anonymous. Now, what does that really mean? That really means that the transactions and the amounts of the transfers are visible to everyone. And the only thing we have is an hexadecimal number that corresponds to the wallet. However, we do not necessarily know who's the owner of this wallet. However, there is systems today that exist that using big data technology approaches are able to correlate these wallets with either individuals or organizations. And what they typically do is they analyze enough data, like maybe IP addresses, multiple transactions, and basically enable to then track down to a specific individual or a specific organization. So typically there's software like chain analysis and others. They're aiding in this approach towards tracking all the transactions in the blockchain space. However, some other blockchains, like for example Monero, has much better anonymous capabilities, meaning that it is able to hide the transactions or the owners of the transactions in a much better way. Some other systems do exist for Bitcoin, sometimes known as blenders or others, that split a large transaction into many smaller ones to try to also conceal the owners of the transactions. The last point of your question had to do with compliance. As you know, Bitcoin or even Ethereum, because it runs on the blockchain, does not necessarily address the issue of compliance. However, what we have seen in the last 4 to 5 years, we have had regulatory sandboxes and regulatory frameworks that have been passed as law and enable us to combine the blockchain, for example, with real world assets, and therefore create what we sometimes refer to as STOs or secure token offerings. STOs or secure token offerings or digital or asset-backed tokens, which is a variation of the same, enables us to use regulated frameworks to actually transact on the blockchain. Now, 80 or even 90% of the transactions today in blockchain are non-regulated. However, in the last 5 years or so, we have started seeing the early steps into regulated transactions. That means I can own some real estate, or sometimes what we call a fraction or a portion of that real estate, gold or other assets, or even, for example, dollars. There's a coin in the Ethereum network known as USDT that is issued. So that really means there will be billions of dollars in USDT generated, but the same amount of dollars are actually stored in a bank vault. So there's a one-to-one relationship between the USDT, the token, and the USDT is being stored in the bank vault. So that means there is a much more trusted system, and through compliance and audits, it helps build a much more secure system. Now, does this really mean that we have addressed all the issues associated with blockchain and security and privacy and compliance? No. We have done a good job at the first baby steps of doing that, but there's still many, many steps ahead for us to do that.
Yeah, yeah. As you talked about vulnerability of these smartphones and all these devices that are being used by users. So with an advent of smart homes, as you know, smart cities and everything smart, the Internet of Things has emerged as an incredible impact, potential and growth, with an estimated 50 billion connected devices by the end of this year. However, most of these IoT devices are easy to hack and compromise, as we discussed earlier. Typically, these IoT devices are limited in compute, storage, and network capacity, and therefore they are more vulnerable to attacks than other endpoint devices such as smartphones and tablets and computers. We're talking about these large-scale devices being used in cities and homes. So, what can be the potential strategy to secure these area for such from such vulnerabilities?
Well, IoT is part of the new generation of networks where we pretty much put an IP address and everything that is part of our lives. Could be sensors in cars, sensors in homes, offices, buildings, even in cities as well. Um, they're also part of what we sometimes call the 5G framework, because typically the implementation of IoT and 5G tend to go hand in hand. Although you can have IoT without 5G, but definitely 5G streamlines the implementation of this IoT technology.
Mm.
There is some elements to make IoT more secure, and there's some of the solution parts involve blockchain, some don't. So let's first start with the ones that do not involve or require blockchain. So that really means that when we look at IoT devices, when they are created, they should be created with security in mind. So that means they should be properly designed, they should be properly tested. There is specific technologies today that are used to test IoT devices. One of these famous technologies is known as fuzzing. Fuzzing will enable us to identify potential vulnerabilities that would have otherwise not been discovered. So some of these solutions, of course, meaning that the devices, especially the ones that use IoT, should have the capability of being patchable or upgradable. So that means they would have some kind of firmware, and this firmware should have the capability to be refreshed or updated to remove any potential vulnerabilities once the devices have already been deployed in the field without having to swap them out for new ones, which would be
Mm.
probably extremely costly. So far, the solutions that I talked about do not involve blockchain. However, some can and do involve blockchain. I'll try to highlight two of them. One of the solutions that involves blockchain involves capturing the configuration of these devices and storing or hashing the configuration of these devices into the blockchain, which means that if the devices were to become compromised, we can compare the hash values of the configuration and identify if this is the original device with its configuration or a modified one. So a distributed ledger blockchain technology can help make the configuration of these IoT devices much more secure and trusted. The second element where blockchain plays an important role in IoT is in the identity management part of IoT. So we have thousands or millions or even billions of these devices sending and providing data on specific sensor data. So what we can do is we can use blockchain to give each device a specific identity. So this allows us to eliminate fake devices or impersonating devices from the network. So for example, if the device is one that happens to be at traffic light, we want to make sure it's not just a smart city, we want also a safe city, one
Mm.
with minimal operational risks. So by having the properly identity management provided on a blockchain technology, this substantially reduces the operational risk associated with these IoT technologies. So I do believe, although blockchain does not solve all the problems of IoT devices, it definitely can help solve some of these issues and make the IoT devices much more trusted.
Yeah, yeah, that was great. So, when we know that blockchain is going on a larger scale, it's going to be implemented in cities and homes. So, public sector and government have been actively exploring new technologies to enable smart services, transformations, and to achieve strategic objectives such as citizens' satisfaction and happiness, and also services efficiency and cost optimization. The blockchain technology is a good example of an emerging technology that is attracting government attention. Many governments entities such as United Kingdom, Estonia, Honduras, Denmark, and Australia, Singapore, and they have been taking few steps to unleash the potential of blockchain technology. Like Dubai government is aiming to become paperless by adopting blockchain technology for all the transactions by 2021. So the problem here is that the research analysis shows that there is a huge potential for blockchain technology to be used in smart government services. So what are the potential security challenges that should be investigated before large-scale blockchain technology implementation? And also, what would you suggest some solutions and what may be the potential benefits of those technologies?
Okay. First, as you know, blockchain is now being used in about 10 different smart cities across the world. But it happens to be Estonia, UK, Australia, Singapore being some of the leaders, but also Dubai as well. The leaders of Dubai have forced all government departments to adopt blockchain by the end of 2020. So with or without COVID, blockchain implementation is going ahead in Smart Dubai and Smart Dubai government. Now, the idea behind the usage of blockchain in the government services and in the government transactions serves several important factors. One is to reduce costs, because when you have a blockchain, it's just another technology of digitalization. So this enables you to perform transactions with much less paper and therefore increased trust, and therefore being able to save the government substantial millions of dollars, or in this case, dirhams, for the respective governments. Now, one has to understand that, as I mentioned earlier, blockchain technology is susceptible to cyber attack against the wallets. Even, so, let's say, for example, a simple attack like, which is not even a cyber attack. Let's say the person forgets the password to his wallet. If there is no key recovery mechanism, the data of the wallet gets completely lost. In the case of Bitcoin, about 5 to 7% of all Bitcoins have been lost forever. So that means without the real password and without a proper key recovery mechanism, the data is lost forever because it's encrypted using fairly sophisticated technology. So one of the key issues certainly to address for things like, for example, government services is definitely blockchain technology that includes key recovery mechanisms so that data does not get lost or get trapped. Now, beyond the risks associated with either social engineering or passwords for the wallets that are part of blockchain environment, one has to understand that any blockchain implementation is usually about only 5 to 7% of the solution. So when we look at the government application, be it a web portal or a mobile app, what we're really talking about is full stack development, not just blockchain development. So that really means for us to remove any cybersecurity risks, we have to not just address the blockchain risks, but the blockchain risks by themselves do not fix the problem. So we need to address all the risks of the full stack development, the various APIs, the web development, the mobile vulnerabilities, and so on, to actually achieve a complete and more secure environment. The last part that I would like to also address here is that in the blockchain, especially with 2.0, we have things like smart contract. Smart contracts are actually code. Many smart contracts, especially in Ethereum, are written in Solidity. But in some of the other blockchains like Hyperledger, they tend to be written in JavaScript. So there's a much larger number of developers that are knowledgeable in JavaScript than they are in Solidity. So there's a factor of like 10 to 1. So there's 10 times more developers for JavaScript than there will ever be for Solidity. So that really means that if we introduce vulnerabilities either via JavaScript or Solidity in the Ethereum or Hyperledger platforms, we need to be able to provide services that automatically audit these smart contracts. Some of the audits are done automated by tools, but some others would be manually done to understand the risks and then patch the smart contracts before they actually get released into public utilization. The last part I would like to mention has to do with the nature of the blockchain. We have public blockchains like Ethereum or Bitcoin. However, many of the government projects are done with private blockchains like Hyperledger. The reason primarily is because governments don't want to expose all their data, even in a pseudo-anonymous way, to all the people out on the internet. So they tend to implement private blockchain schemes which provide additional security and control at some expense. And the expense is the decentralization expense, meaning that they're much less decentralized and at a much higher risk of sometimes what we refer to as a 51% attack, which means that you control 51% of the miners, therefore you can insert validated transactions into this blockchain, which is actually quite a risk. So these are the key areas that I believe are important for governments to address.
Yeah. Now, as we go on large-scale implementations, can you list some potential use cases and applications of blockchain technology to enable government services and also highlight some future research in this area that of concern that could require further investigation before large-scale implementation?
So definitely there are several things that are extremely important. One is to address the scalability issue, because when we're serving the citizens, we cannot have to wait 20 minutes for a transaction to actually complete. Obviously, this can be solved with either more advanced blockchains or with private blockchains, which will have a much higher throughput. If you're implementing blockchain in a smart city context with all the sensors that we just talked about a few minutes ago, any blockchain would have to support millions of transactions per second to actually being able to support such a system. So some of the use cases that I think are important, or at least the initial ones, what I sometimes call the low-hanging fruit. One example is in real estate transactions. So one can automate what we call the title deeds, which is reflects the ownership of the property. So places like Dubai have started introducing title deeds on the blockchain. So as the title deeds get transferred from one person to the other, who is the real owner of that building or that piece of land is actually directly represented in this blockchain. The second area that I think is of high top interest for governments today is in the area of what we call CBDC, which stands for central bank digital currencies. So a lot of work is being done today into trying to implement CBDCs in various countries. Today, the number of countries that have some form of CBDC or central bank digital currency is relatively small. So there's a big race to propose these projects and actually get the government to adopt some of this new technology in a very fast or expedited way.
Yeah, perfect. So now, as we know that there's 5G implementation coming in big cities and all over the world. So in the future 5G paradigm, billions of machine type devices will be deployed to enable wide area and present data sensing, collection, and transmission. So, considering the traffic characteristics of machine to machine communication and the spectrum shortage dilemma, a cost efficient solution is to share the underutilized spectrum allocated to human users with machine to machine devices in an opportunistic manner. So, the implementation of large scale spectrum sharing in 5G heterogeneous networks confronts many challenges, including the lack of incentive mechanism, privacy leakages, security threats, and so on. Now, how can we develop a privacy preserved and incentive compatible and spectrum efficient framework based on blockchain?
So I do believe that blockchain can play an extremely important role in this level of implementation. As I mentioned before, a blockchain is a technology of trust. So by introducing trust between the machine to machine communication of the two devices, then basically we would achieve a much better and much more a secure solution. So each device would use the blockchain to automatically identify itself before any of the communication actually take place. Now, other areas that can be easily protected include the data transmission themselves or the storage of this data. As you know, today, big data is important, and you want this data to be trusted from the original source. So by stamping this data with the right digital signatures, the data will also remain identifiable. So this will make the machine to machine more attributable of who actually owns this data in an effective way. Regarding the spectrum management, that would be a completely different area to address because spectrum management typically tends to be addressed by regulatory authorities. So, and it varies very much on a country by country basis. So, for example, 5G, yes, shares some common ranges, or we can call the core ranges of frequencies, and those would be implemented in all the countries. But there's many ranges of frequency that are optional in 5G. And on one side, they need to be licensed by the licensor or the national manager of the 5G licenses. So this, and by having a proper management of these frequencies, so they vary a lot from country to country. So let's take the example of Pakistan. Some of the frequencies that might be allocated to 5G or 5G capable are now, you can say, allocated to defense departments. So these defense departments would not necessarily release for public use these frequencies. So that means the implementation of 5G vis-a-vis frequencies can be relatively quite different on a country by country basis.
Yeah, perfect. So as we know that blockchain is going on and is being attractive as an attractive seen as an attractive technology. So it is also being witnessed that blockchain has been of a great interest in healthcare industry. There has been and it is a viable technology that can improve the healthcare data sharing and storing system owing to its decentralized and immutability and transparency and traceability features. And also the value proposition of using blockchain technology in the healthcare sector is to share sensitive patient data among healthcare entities securely and to empower patients. Blockchain technology allows patients to help. Can you highlight some of the benefits of blockchain technology in the healthcare sector?
Well, actually, I do believe, again, blockchain can play an extremely active role in the healthcare sector. I'll try to highlight two, maybe three of these areas. Healthcare sector today is much more reliable on data that is being produced by either sensors or diagnostic machines. So the first example would be to ensure that this data actually is a provenance from this correct source. So being able to track, trace, and stamp this data with the right source so that we can actually trust the diagnostic data. The second element that I believe is extremely important as a use case for blockchain and healthcare data would be in the area of patient data portability. So as you know, the patient records may exist in one hospital or not in another, or one clinic or another. So by having proper patient, like being able to properly identify, then we establish a much better trust within the medical environment. So I can take my medical record on a USB stick, and I own the keys to that data, and then I only open the data to whom has access. And depending on the levels of authority in the blockchain, certain doctors or certain nurses will only have access to the data that makes sense for them to actually use. The third use case that I do believe is quite important in the area of healthcare is in the area of supply chain or authenticity of either medical devices or medical supplies, or even, I would say, drugs or medicines. So by having supply chain information embedded or used in conjunction, what it really means that we will be able to identify using a QR code or some other simpler technology whether the medication we're about to take is from the original source, or instead of being a fake one. It's almost like a unique serial number that will help us address the true identity and provenance of that treatment or that medication. So the supply chain is important because in the medical field today, we have many supplies of fake medication, and even things like fake PPE. So today, many people are using PPE equipment, which should be gloves, face masks, etc. So if they are not manufactured to the right specifications, like 3M, with the right level, that means there's a lot of impersonators and fake ones of a much lower grade quality. That means this would again put the patients at risk instead of using the right original equipment or original treatments in their environment. So these are the probably three top healthcare cases that I would consider here as being important.
Okay, perfect. So let's talk about Bitcoin now. Blockchain is a technology that was proposed to enable the decentralized digital currency. Bitcoin is its inception. Blockchain has been widely used in many other areas, including tracing sensor data and mitigating the replication of IoT applications, the healthcare industry, and e-voting. Can you provide a comprehensive review and analysis of the major security and privacy issues of Bitcoin and blockchain, its major challenges and opportunities in utilizing the technology?
Well, Bitcoin as a technology, first, it is not a currency. It might be a store of value. The reason why I say it's not a currency is because it's severely limited by the number of transactions that can be done per second. So the blockchain system does not have the capabilities of performing the right number of transactions fast enough. Now, there is extra technologies around Bitcoin, like one of them is called the Lightning Network, that enables us to batch Bitcoin transactions into one, and therefore reduce or go for validation much less frequently. Now, these are hybrid systems that on one side are creative and usable, but on the other side, they are actually breaking down the original principles for which, for example, Bitcoin was created. So that really means we need to have a proper balanced approach. As we move forward, I do believe not just Bitcoin, but Bitcoin, definitely Ethereum and other crypto currencies will play an extremely important role in the success. And the reason primarily is because of the decentralized nature of these solutions and the fact that these solutions cannot be addressed by one specific individual or so. So the primary, what we call the proof of work that is being done by the miners and rewarded for their transaction processing is what builds the trust mechanism within that solution.
Yeah, perfect. So challenges of Bitcoin attacks, its probability of success in performing the attack George?
Yes, please repeat the
Yeah,
last question
I
because
will. I
there was bandwidth challenges.
will. I was asking what is the risk of double spending attacks and what is the profitability for attackers to Bitcoin peer-to-peer network security risk and the Bitcoin storage security.
Okay, I think the bandwidth is still a bit low, but let's hope it stays stable.
Okay.
So I do believe that you mentioned about the double spending attacks. This is one of the
Yeah.
problems that Bitcoin was introduced to solve. However, although it solved this problem, there is still some risk of attack, what we sometimes call the 51% attack, where you create an alternative version of reality. In networks like Bitcoin or Ethereum, this would be literally impossible because an attack would cost something as much as 50 million per. So it was let's say 5 million per minute to actually attack. So that means let's say a 10-minute attack will cost you $50 million to have enough miners running to validate the transactions for you. So that really means it is not a practical or cost-effective type of attack. However, some of the less popular coins have been attacked several times, and some of them in a very successful way. So that really means the number or the total number of nodes that these blockchains use is much lower. So it'll be much easier for somebody to create a larger number of nodes on, for example, the Amazon hosting environment, and then broadcasting their usability.
Yeah. So that was like that was the answer to my question. Yeah.
Okay,
Thank you.
please go ahead.
So yeah, I would like to ask some other questions that can we compare Bitcoin wallets in terms of security, types of services, and their trade-offs with the security and privacy features of alternate currencies and their overview.
Well, today you can say there is various types of wallets. There is hot wallets, there is cold wallets, there's wallets that you keep in dexes or in centralized environments, centralized crypto trading environments. Each of these wallet approach has its own pluses and minuses. So that means if you're in a centralized exchange, you can validate, this much faster. However, centralized exchanges are sometimes at the risk of cyber attacks. So if you want to have a safer approach towards your wallet and towards your coin, then you should consider a system that provides custodial services and also a system in which you're exposed to the minimum any kind of blockchain environments that you have. So I do believe that this approach is probably one that provides the best security possible. Now, one thing I probably worth mentioning as well. I mean, since we're talking about wallets, we talked about three types. The last one that I did not cover probably in detail is what we call cold wallets. So cold wallets like Nano or, for example, Ledger, or Trezor. These are wallets that are designed to actually keep your bitcoins private and in a safe way. And because they're off grid, it provides extra additional layers of security and more safe. Now, does that mean that these wallets are 100% secure? The answer is no. There has been documented a few, not too many, but serious cyber attacks against these wallets. So from time to time, the vendors of these wallets have had to create basically patches to make sure that the wallets stay secure.
About the financial sector. Blockchain offers an unprecedented opportunities for innovation and financial transactions. Investment and stock markets awaits privacy issues, and can we provide an overview of risk and security requirements and also give an outlook for the future research that an effective approach transactions based on smart contracts.
Well, I do believe that as blockchain gets wider adoption, one of the latest technologies known as DeFi. DeFi stands for decentralized finance. This enables you as individuals to solve much bigger challenges. That means it allows you to actually create a distributed, decentralized virtual bank on the blockchain environment. Now, this approach towards creating just synthetic assets and providing everything on the blockchain going to be safer and more secure? Yes, it will be definitely more secure, but nothing today is 100% secure. So we need to be able to provide the necessary mechanisms to ensure the smart contracts are as safe as they could be. And the way we do that is primarily by doing two key functions. One is to scan these smart contracts through what we call engines that validate vulnerabilities and identify risks associated with specific sections of the smart contract. The second example is more to do with traditional bank transfer. So that means being able to validate this approach. Now, with this new technology, like for example, DeFi, what we're able to do is generate a whole new generation of services. And these services enable us to, for example, earn interest or provide insurance or digitize shares of commodities, which is something that would have been relatively difficult to do in other environments. So the smart contracts that are actually controlling these transactions need to be properly audited by third parties, both using code audit as well as manual audit to ensure that no vulnerabilities or risks are actually contained in these smart contracts.
We've almost reached the final part of our session. Now, I would like to ask the last question. Since its inception, the blockchain technology has shown promising application prospects. From the initial cryptocurrency to smart contracts, blockchain has been addressing security and privacy issues of blockchain, but they lack a systematic examination on the security of blockchain system. So, what should be a systematic study on the security threats of blockchain, considering the corresponding real attacks in some popular blockchain systems, and what can be the security enhancement solutions for blockchain, which can be used in the development of various blockchain systems, and also suggest some future directions for to steer the research effort into this area.
Well, I do believe that security, to be effective, security needs to be a continuous process. So let's take, for example, first Bitcoin. Most people probably do not realize this, but even today in Bitcoin network, there are actually some vulnerabilities in the code. Now, these vulnerabilities are not critical, therefore, there is no urgency to patch them, but they do exist. As a general rule, for every 10,000 lines of code, there is a severe bug, or for 1,000 lines of codes, there is a normal bug or traditional problem that gets created. So these new smart contract codes sometimes can be hundreds or thousands of lines of code. So this code, like any other code, needs to be properly audited to remove any kind of risks associated with operating this code in the environment. So this means that any cybersecurity approach towards blockchain would have to have a continuous approach that enables us to validate the risks and then create the proper countermeasures to actually reduce the risk. Many times when I do my presentations, I use the analogy of a car. So when I first arrived in Pakistan 25 years ago, and I got into a car and I tried to put a seatbelt, there was no seatbelt in the car. This cost $5 to provide this level of protection. Of course, today, all the cars in Pakistan have a seatbelt. But as we move around the world, the cars that we drive today not only have a seatbelt, they have seatbelt, they have airbags, they have traction control, they have collision avoidance systems, and even AI systems to power its navigation. Without or with all this technology, the cars that we drive are much more safer than they were a few years ago. However, we have realized that even if these cars are 99% safe, they're never 100%. And the simple reason is one of the most important elements of the equation is not the car itself, but the driver of the car, the end user. So that really means any successful implementation of these systems needs to have continuous approach towards security and needs to have a security approach that also includes the end user. And one has to keep in mind that the average end user is not always extremely technical. So today, when we do transactions on DeFi and we have to put this hexadecimal, put that one, it is not accessible to the average user. So that means we will not be able to secure that user if we would not have given all the necessary permutations as we move forward. So a balanced solution on one side is a continuous approach to security to find the vulnerabilities, patch them. Another one is to actually focus on end user to build the right security awareness to avoid scams and others that enables their funds, either blockchain, Ethereum, or others, to actually be fully protected. So if we achieve that, then we will have a much better approach towards blockchain and cybersecurity combined together.
Yeah, perfect. Perfect. These are all the questions. It was really nice being here with you, and We really thank you for giving us your valued time, and
Sure.
let's end this session with.
So thank you very much.
You
I
very
think we came close within 1 or 2 minutes of the hour. So it was a pleasure to be with you. So I wish you a very pleasant good afternoon and good evening, and best of luck for your conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Bye bye.
Bye bye.